From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, tips for when you suddenly run out of hot dogs for the barbecue and have to settle for grilled porcupine. And now, the podcast host who would never eat a porcupine because he's got more garden gophers than a harpy eagle, Pete Dominic!
Oh, yeah, they are absolutely everywhere. Thank you, Pete Co., and thank you for joining us today on another episode of Stand Up, where my very special guest is Republican strategist Rina Shah. For the first time on the show, we get into it, all of it. Very interesting conversation for your final Monday in May. It is Memorial Day as I lay this down for you here, and I hope you had a good weekend. I hope you're having a good weekend. I hope you took the day off. Maybe you took many days off. It's the unofficial beginning of summer, everybody, and very excited because I had a very quiet weekend, but this coming weekend, it's the big high school reunion this weekend. Really looking forward to that. I hope you are looking forward to all kinds of summer activities and whatever you do for your summer. I am very happy to have you here on Stand Up today and every day, pretty much almost every day. I mean, I've been posting a show almost every Saturday now as well, and I'm going to be adding more content now, working very hard to make this podcast the number one podcast in the world. Okay, I'm not. But there's a guy on SiriusXM who used to say that all the time. Working very hard to make this show the number one. What an idiot. Andrew Wilkow. You ever heard of him? Oof. Really just a bizarre fella. Anyway, moving on. Sorry for trashing my former coworkers. Couple news stories I want to mention that, well, of course, Turkish state media has declared that Erdogan is the winner of the presidential runoff election there. He's extended his rule into a third decade. A real authoritarian dictator continues to take power, have power over there in Turkey. Also over the weekend, the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who is a terrible person who has been accused of all kinds of crimes. He's been indicted for all kinds of things, and somehow he's maintained power for years. Well, he has just been impeached by his fellow Republicans in the Texas State House. I mean, you got to be bad if you're going to get impeached by Texas Republicans. It's now going to the Texas Senate. That's an interesting story if you want to follow that. By the way, his wife is in the Senate, and she's not recusing herself from the vote, at least as of now. It's a real Shakespearean tragedy down there in Texas. Be interesting to see what happens there. But it seemed like a fairly quiet weekend of news for Memorial Day weekend, outside of the major story regarding the United States debt ceiling. President Biden and House Speaker and empty barrel Kevin McCarthy apparently reached a deal to avoid U.S. default, but now they have to sell it to Congress. So we will see what happens, and everybody has a lot of different opinions. Who do you go to? How closely have you followed this? Here's the Associated Press. With days to spare before a potential first ever government default, President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy reached final agreement Sunday in a deal to raise the nation's debt ceiling and worked to ensure enough support in Congress to pass the measure in the coming week. Well, the Freedom Caucus, conservative Republicans, the real nut jobs, you know, the traitors, the Jan Sixers, those guys, they're pissed. House Republicans are torching Kevin McCarthy over the debt ceiling deal. I mean, I guess he's got Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan, but lots of conservatives not buying it. This deal is insanity, tweeted Ralph Norman. A $4 trillion debt increase with virtually no cuts is not what we agreed to. Not going to vote to bankrupt our country. The American people deserve better. Lauren Boebert said, you can count me as a no on this deal. We can do better. Dan Bishop of North Carolina heard the call. Rhinos congratulating McCarthy for getting almost Zippo in exchange for $4 trillion debt ceiling hike was enough to make you. And then throw up emoji. More Republicans. I'm hearing the deal is for $4 trillion increase in the debt limit. If that's true, I don't need to hear anything else. No one claiming to be conservative could justify a yes vote. So that's just a short roundup of a few of the extreme Republicans in the House on this. And here's President Biden, sounding not too bad for a guy who people say is in cognitive decline.
Mr. President, what do you say to members of your own party who say you've made too many concessions in this deal?
They'll find I didn't.
And Kevin McCarthy had a rare kind word for the president and his team. Boy, I hope Trump sees this.
I do want to thank the president's team that he put together. Very professional, very smart, very strong beliefs that are different than ours. And I think at the end of the day, people can look together to be able to pass this in the House and the Senate together to sign it and send it to the president.
Wow. All right. Wow. Those are nice words. That's not going to bode well for Kevin McCarthy. Let's go back to President Biden last night at the White House.
Do you think it's time for the U.S. to get rid of the debt limit? That this is, for the reasons you just laid out?
No, I think it would cause more controversy getting rid of the debt limit, although I am exploring the idea that we would, at a later date, a year or two from now, decide whether or not the 14th Amendment, how that actually would impact on whether or not you need to do the debt limit every year. But that's another day.
That's another day, says President Biden yesterday at the White House. Let's head over to MSNBC, where David Rothkopf, our friend, was on MSNBC with Mehdi Hasan and Bruce Bartlett.
David, Biden said there would be no negotiations. Not only did he do negotiations, Bruce is saying they were not meaningful negotiations from a Democratic point of view.
Well, obviously, they were meaningful negotiations. If we avoided debt default, we maintained our spending levels. We didn't have major draconian cuts across the way that the Republicans wanted. And we're going to now be able to go forward and grow our economy, which has been the objective of the president all along. I think it's incredibly naive to think that if the White House thought the 14th Amendment would work, they wouldn't have invoked it. Of course they would have. But they did the math and they realized that the turmoil this was likely to cause in the courts wasn't going to work. I think the president was very canny in the way that he handled this negotiation because he didn't get out and lie like McCarthy did. He didn't go and, get all extreme about it. He made them come to him with an offer. He sat down, he negotiated this. And I got to tell you, this is a lot better than most people thought they would end up with a budget from McCarthy and the Republicans on an ongoing basis in the normal budget process.
Okay, last word to you, Bruce. You're being naive, David suggests, and this was a better deal than anyone expected.
Well, look, if you're going to say to a hostage taker, okay, I'm glad I bid you down from $100,000 to return my child unharmed to only $50,000. Well, that's a pretty good deal, I guess, except that the hostage is still there. It's going to be taken in 2 years, and 2 years after that, forever, until we stop the extortion. I think at some point, some president, probably not Biden, has got to get rid of this threat. And the Constitution has many ways that it would allow that to happen.
If one of my producers is listening to me now, can someone write down that we need to get Bruce and David back in 2025 when we do this all again to debate this again? Bruce.
I'll get him on first, Mehdi Hasan. How about that? I just thought it was great that he had Rothkopf and Bartlett debating and wanted to bring you that for some perspective, because that's what I do. I give you as much perspective as I can on these big issues as they're breaking. But now let's see what happens if this can get through Congress. One last hurdle. Will the deal pass? The New York Times says the right flank of the House Republicans has a big say. Those lawmakers have a history of doing everything they can to block spending deals they disapprove of. They could do so again, and they have sufficient power to kill the deal because McCarthy has only a 9-vote majority. Well, we'll see what happens. It's all going to unfold rather quickly over the next couple of days, so I'd rather not waste your and my time speculating about it. But to avoid default, the House and Senate still have to pass the deal and send it to the president to sign it. What else can I tell you? Internationally, Russia launched its largest drone attack on Kiev so far last night. That's Saturday night. Ukraine shot it down more than 40 drones over the capital. Wow. COVID is rising again in China, but the country is not returning to lockdowns. The Celtics came back from a 3-0 series deficit to win Game 6 against the Heat. Wow. Oh, no. Siegel's going to be pissed, and many others as well. Christian Finnegan. And I watched the season finale or the series finale of Succession in real time. First time I've done that in a long time. Where are my Succession watchers? I don't really like to talk much about TV. I just like to watch it. And what do we look for in the week ahead? Ron DeSantis is going to hold his first in-person presidential campaign event on Tuesday in Des Moines, Iowa. The Scripps Spelling Bee, the national finals, will be held this Thursday. Unemployment numbers will be released this Friday. It's the first week of June, folks. So welcome to it. I'm very happy to have you joining me here on the show today. I've got some really exciting guests joining me this week. Trying to get a lot of new people and book ahead, plan ahead. So if you've got ideas, send them over. Many of you have been lately, especially. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Any guest ideas, anything I can do better, any sound clips, send it all over. Help me produce the show because it's just me in the old shed and I can always use your help. So keep it coming. And I can always use your subscription. If you haven't signed up, hey, please sign up now. Got a couple of subscriptions last week, but it's the end of the month, and that means credit cards die, and I get all panicky because I always see a few subscriptions go away. So hook a brother up so we can keep this train moving. Also, this week, I will be hosting a hangout on Wednesday night. That's right, Wednesday, not Thursday, because Thursday is my 3-day weekend of debauchery with the fellas from high school. So Wednesday night hangout. So maybe if you can't usually make it because it's Thursdays, we'll see you on Wednesday at 8 p.m. East. But now I am going to bring you my conversation with Rina Shah, who I met on panels that I was doing on MSNBC back just before the pandemic, she reminded me. She is a congressional and political advisor, a corporate and nonprofit board member. She's an on-air guest analyst and commentator, as you hear her here. She's an advisory board member of the Renew Democracy Initiative, a contributing writer to The Week magazine. She went to West Virginia and Cornell and Yale. She's very, very smart and somehow still a Republican. So we had it out about that and everything else. Always trying to find new voices and new ideas. Rina has always been real cool to me, and we have crossed paths many times, so I finally wanted to get her on here. Look forward to hearing what you think about our conversation. You can find Rina on Twitter at Rina in DC. RinaShah.us is the website, or runwithrina.com. They both take you there. Let's get it started right now for the first time with Rina Shah.
Boom! There she is. Rina Shah, finally on. I'm so sorry it's been so long.
Hey, Pete. It's so good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Where do we meet? At the CNN, the MSNBC, at the Sirius
MSNBC.
XM? Yeah.
There was a big round table in the mornings. Remember donuts?
Oh, it was the best. It was the best show ever. Yeah. Made a lot of friends there. And I'm certain you did as well. But I wasn't sure if that...
It was a good time. Right before the pandemic. Like, I believe it was 2018, 2019 when I met you. And then suddenly, boom, like we weren't doing the show anymore in person. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. What a shame. Anyway, I'm psyched to talk to you one-on-one and to have you here and to learn a little bit about you and get your thoughts on things and hopefully talk more often in the future. But just tell everybody a little bit about your upbringing, your life. You're first generation American. Or no, you were not born.
Yeah, I would be, I guess, right?
Well, where were you born?
Well, I was born and raised in southern West Virginia.
Right.
But people have different definitions of first gen and second gen. So rarely do people call me second gen, but I consider myself first gen because I'm the first generation to be born here.
I thought that was it.
Yeah. To me, that's been the definition.
Yeah. No, my wife's mom and dad both came from Italy, and so she was the first one. So that's where I got it. I thought that was it. So you were born in West Virginia.
Yeah. Southern coal fields. So like deep red nowadays, but purple when I was growing up, if you'll believe it. So voting blue statewide, but red for presidential. That was always this sort of appetite of the voters. And my parents actually were also super purple. They supported some Democrats, some Republicans. My dad even backed a libertarian candidate for governor back in the 90s.
Your dad was a surgeon and your mom was a lawyer?
Yes. So I am very much the black sheep because politics is not a profession. So
was there that push and pull? Was there an argument about what you should be doing with your life? Was there stereotypes, doctor, lawyer, all that?
Oh my gosh, 9 times out of 10, you ask any first generation kid of Indian descent, like heavy, lay it on thick type of pressure throughout their most formative years to go get a very stable job. And For me, yeah, there was a lot of that. But I think at the end of the day, my parents realized they were raising a rebel. I'm the eldest of three. And that I was just far more interested in the Time magazine subscription and listening to NPR. I blame my dad. Like he was the reason that I got into all of that. And the liberal arts were very appealing to me. Writing, reading. I would spend hours. My brother's like, you would take this blanket as a 7-year-old and like go into the sun with your sunglasses and some kind of novel. And I'm like, 7? Really? He's like, oh, really? And it was bizarre.
Oh, wow. I love that. No, that's great. Well, what was it like? What was the community like demographically? Were you like the Brown family in the white neighborhood?
I mean, definitely there was that. And but my experience growing up is that there was a lot of diversity because the United Mine Workers of America had a lot of foreign doctors. My dad was part of this first wave of Indian immigrants. And actually, my dad only came from India because he had done 4 years of medical school in India. But prior to that, my dad was born and raised in Uganda. And his dad was born and raised there, and his dad had immigrated. So we were immigrants from India to Uganda as merchants in the early 1800s before our family was kicked out by Idi Amin. And by that time, Dad was already at Duke University in North Carolina as a surgical fellow. So, talk about losing everything overnight. My dad's side of the family has lost all that.
Oh, wow. That's a crazy story.
Three generations of wealth, Pete, like wiped out overnight because Idi Amin, and there's this great film called The Last King of Scotland. But I mean, obviously that's a film that is, I mean, I wouldn't say it's fictional, but the reality is this. If you want to deep dive into kind of the history of Indians in Uganda, there's a great BBC documentary called Ugandan Asians. And that one tells the real story. And so I always say I'm going to draw the straight line and I'm going to go quickly there. I oppose Donald Trump because I know what dictators do to families. I know they cause generational trauma. I mean, my dad's side of the family, there's still a lot of healing that needs to be done. Losing everything, going from being tremendously wealthy one minute to fleeing to the UK the next.
Wow.
And my dad was one of 8 children, the only son. So if you know Indian culture, it was very patriarchal. And having to restart everything with just $80. But because he was educated. So, people think that like, there was this pressure for me to get highly educated. And yes, there was. But at some point, my parents were like, do what makes you happy. And that was a really different thing than a lot of friends were being told. Even my non-Indian friends, my white friends were not even told that. They were kind of, hey, walk this straight and narrow. But I think probably around the time of 17, 18, I didn't want to go to college, actually. I didn't want to go to my high school graduation. That's actually a story I don't think I've ever told to anyone. I just hated school so much. I never felt welcome. I never felt like I fit in anywhere. And that wasn't even socially. It was just like academically. I just went through the motions because that's what you're supposed to do. But I would crave getting outside of school. And I felt like I taught myself so much outside of school through books and reading and the great privilege of having traveled because my parents were able to climb the socioeconomic ladder. And my parents were just like, look, whatever you're going to do at the end of the day, be the best at it. And they didn't know what that was going to be. And I didn't know what it was going to be for a long time. But, I did it. I finished college. At the end of the day, I think I've made them proud because I became an entrepreneur. And that's what they did as well.
Yeah, tell the people and me, because I don't know all of it, like, just list through your resume of jobs. You've had a bunch of different, really interesting positions and jobs. Give me the highlight. Give me a list. Give me the bullet points. Brag a little bit.
The bullets. I mean, I landed up in D.C. January 2006. Never looked back. I always thought I'd maybe move somewhere else, but I came over to just get this public policy internship. And thank God it was paid back in that day being 2006. So like not that long ago. But yeah, I had to work 2 other jobs while I did this internship. So I taught aerobics, I tutored kids. And then I sort of very quickly after that internship, I got another one. And it was actually at the Georgetown University Criminal Justice Clinic. And I loved that one because that one really pulled back the curtain on me for like, what is government, what's it mean to people, particularly from populations in Washington, D.C., that these people were going to jail for nothing, Pete. Like I'm talking like the most just the tiniest of offenses. And a lot of times it was marijuana. They were doing hard time, these people. Yep. And I would go to jail and I'd be researching and doing field stuff. And that was cool. But somehow, government drew me back. I went up to Capitol Hill. I went in to interview for this job of staff assistant because I'd seen that you could be a congressional staffer. You could help a member of Congress. I'd never worked on a campaign. in my life. I go in, I interview for staff assistant. I walk out with the role of scheduler, not realizing like what a gatekeeping job that was. It was so massive. And I did that right around the time that, for those of our financial industry folks who love to talk about that big crisis around 2008, I think Bear Stearns had toppled, right? So what had happened essentially was that it was trial by fire for me. I didn't handle any financial issues for this congressman, but what I really realized is how vital a congressional staffer can be. And I loved it. I got that bug on Capitol Hill. So I worked for one member of Congress from New Jersey, and then I went and worked for another member of Congress from Florida. And I was on the senior staff of both. And so seeing the administrative track, the political track, and especially that legislative track, I loved handling issues, but what I loved the most was really the strategic pieces of like how this person got here, how they were going to remain there. But what I really, really hated most, Pete, and this is kind of atypical for anybody that was working for a Republican, I was disgusted by the amount of dialing for dollars these people had to do. Like their whole days were spent doing that. So on Capitol Hill, I got my chops that way. And unsurprisingly, actually, I caught the campaign bug because I was just so burnt out on Capitol Hill after serving these two members of Congress. So I decided early 2011, I was just going to go out and be like sort of a general Republican consultant, whatever that meant. I told my bosses, like, good luck. I'm going to go take a little sabbatical. I hadn't taken like a break in years of any sort, like no vacation, nothing. And it was just a really, really formative experience for me because I could have never created my campaign consultancy had I not worked on Capitol Hill.
When did you arrive? I mean, were both members Republicans?
Both Republicans. Yeah.
When did you kind of arrive? Did you arrive at a political ideology at some point, or did you just happen to get jobs with Republicans and then start to arrive at a political ideology? Like, when did you start to become more of a, I guess, Republican? Whatever that means anymore.
Yeah, no, whatever that means in this era, right? Because this era is so messed up.
We'll get to it. Yeah.
Right. If we can talk about that dysfunction, like I feel like we'll be here all day of the Republican Party currently, but I feel, what I'm doing by showing people that I can still be in this party is showing them that there are practical people who came to this party literally because of values. So I briefly touched on my family's history with oppression, dictators, whatever we want to call it, right? It was formative. And so my dad always talked to me about America and to our whole family as a concept, this like beautiful place that you could be who you wanted to be. And my dad was a polio survivor. So if it weren't for the Americans with Disabilities Act, like Dad wouldn't have made it in life. I wouldn't be here. And I think that equality, that freedom, that liberty, all that stuff that's woven in, and this real love for the Constitution and what's at the very core of the fabric of this country, that is why I gravitated towards the Republican Party, because I thought that's the home for this stuff. It just made sense to me. I wasn't looking so much as figures. I wasn't looking at figureheads. I wasn't obsessed with Reagan. I really loved the American presidency. Don't get me wrong. I feel like I studied it on my own deeply. And yeah, I did actually. I mean, I have a whole bookcase dedicated to the American presidency. And so it's like one of my greatest privileges in life to be able to say I've spoke for 2 presidential campaigns by now. And they were smaller ones. But, one was a Republican one in 2012, and the other one was 2016, Evan McMullin, and that was an independent one. So, yeah, I'm more of an independent these days, but 18 to something like what? When did Trump arrive? When I was like maybe in my early 30s somewhere, because now I'm on the door of 40. And I'm thinking to myself about the past 7 years. And, I've had a lot of moments where I'm like, should I even call myself a Republican anymore? But it's like, why should I leave the party? Because, Trump came and hijacked the whole damn thing. And people are like, wait, there were already problems with it. I'm like, yeah, I get that. And so speaking of those problems, like, that's why I left Capitol Hill. That's definitely a tough one to tease out for me, because I do have respect for the 2 men that I worked for on the Hill, Congressman Jeff Miller and Congressman Scott Garrett. Florida and New Jersey, respectively, and both of them are retired. So Garrett's now, his successor was Josh Gottheimer, who's a Democrat. So that seat flipped from Republican to Democrat. Yeah. And Scott was just too conservative for that district. And he was really too socially conservative for me. The year that I joined him, which was somewhere 2008, I realized he was the only member of Congress when I joined him in that body in the House that was still anti-abortion in the case of incest and rape.
Yeesh.
Yeah. So he was kind of just not aligned with me. So it was a job, right? At some point you're like, okay, these people aren't really with me on this stuff, but I'm learning how this, the sausage is made. I hate that phrase, but there it is. And then when I went to Miller, he, he was an interesting guy, but he was also very socially conservative. And his predecessor was Joe Scarborough, and his successor is Matt Gaetz, who is a total Looney Tuneville. And so Miller was very, very anti-gay around the time that I was in his office. And I had a lot of gay Republican male friends. And I think he sort of one time just in passing said something to me like it's a phase. Being gay. And it was about I think I brought up former Congressman Aaron Schock.
Yeah.
And as we all know, he's gay. He's out. And at that time, he wasn't out when I was on the Hill working for Miller.
But everybody on the Hill knew he was gay.
Everybody knew.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just so beautiful, right? Yeah. Not to stereotype our gay friends, right? But this guy clearly loved himself, loved decor, loved all the things. Anyway, so I'm telling my former boss, I'm like, so he's rumored to be gay. And I think it was that moment when he said it's a phase that I realized what I had to do and I had to move on.
Wow.
And I couldn't be around that. So
are you religious?
I am of the Jain faith. So it's similar to anybody who's not familiar with Jainism. It's similar to Buddhism. And so I would say I'm spiritual because to me, it's a way of life, Jainism, rather than this very, very, very strict religion. Yeah, it's got its moments, but so I'm a person of faith, but Jainism's central tenet is live and let live. And I think that's just, again, tied me to this whole sense of government shouldn't be in my bedroom, my backyard, or my bank account because they should just live in, let me live. And sounds a little corny, right? But no, I mean, what am I to say, right?
I'm really trying to get to I with you, with anybody, what instructs their ideology. I think it's a really fascinating thing to listen to, which is why I'm trying to do that with you and thinking about, you've already given us so much information about your childhood, your upbringing, and to some extent what instructs your values. But I mean, I guess specifically what I want to get to is before Trump Republicanism, I am such a progressive, anti-Republican person. And I've always been that way. Since I started paying attention, when I grew up, I think I liked Reagan because I watched Family Ties, Alex P. Keaton. But as soon as I became aware of the world outside of me as a teenager, my brother was a big activist and then journalist. So that he was the main influence for sure. He brainwashed me for sure into his beliefs, which I still mostly, I think, share. But I guess I never understood the values of the Republican Party. I always felt like they were very punitive and very individualistic and very anti the idea of government and obviously really super racist and sexist. How does a brown woman exist in that party even then? I mean, you must not have seen it that way, or you did, or what?
When you ask me that question just squarely, it's by not embracing my identity. Because even to this day, I tell people I'm not Indian. I don't feel a connection to India in any way other than I have family members who live there. And I think it's a beautiful country with beautiful people, customs, traditions, all of it. It's gorgeous. But I mean, I grew up doing a lot of that because my mother was born and raised there, but my dad was not, right? So there's this situation in which when you don't feel this connection to this place, how can you hyphenate your name with it? How can you embrace that identity?
I think that's really, I shouldn't have interrupted you. I think you were explaining it well. I think that's great. I think that the idea, certainly of a certain generation, was to kind of assimilate and to try to get along and even though you're not the same, just, kind of speak the language, obviously. And I appreciate that. I can totally understand that. You're just like me. You grew up almost just like me. I mean, I had fourth generation, so there's really very little ethnicity or religion or anything like that. So maybe not just like me, but I mean, I see what you're saying in terms of not identifying with another country when you're growing up in freaking West Virginia. But I guess what I mean by, and you were going to get to this point, by as a brown woman, you already touched on the kind of the woman thing being,
sure.
But in terms of did you not field discrimination, did you not then at any point ascribe any of that to a political ideology or specifically the Republican Party? That never really came to you.
That click never came. And I know people find that really hard to believe, but it's true. Everything is gray in life, right? It's not so black and white. People just assume that I'm just this chick from a southern rural state, and I'm like, that I must hate myself somehow to want to embrace this, this party that had this, that really benefit from the Southern strategy, essentially. And that's hard for me to look at. Look, I'm a student of history. And like I said, I really believe in being self-taught. And I know there's so much that doesn't line up with my values, but I don't hate any Democrat because where I've always been is just right of center. I've never been far right. And even with Jainism, which is the reason that I'm a vegetarian, I always talk about, I have this huge extended family and all my cousins who are like much older now, 30s, 40s, 50s, they all are first generation as well. And so many of them started eating meat, even though they were raised vegetarian. And I always think about why me and my siblings didn't. And it's not because we're like holier than thou or anything. It's because my parents were like, look, this is our religion. Your friends may be eating meat. You're welcome to try meat. You're welcome to eat meat at school, wherever, at a party. But this is why we don't. And when they gave us that choice, it was like my choice. And therefore, it was my brother's choice, my sister's choice. And I think giving that choice, and my parents never said, be a Republican. No pastor came to me, again, I'm not Christian, and was like, be a Republican. Nobody ever was like, do this, because West Virginia in the 80s and 90s, again, my experience was super purple. So like, look at everybody and tease it out and be whatever you want to be. And actually, it was Joe Manchin, who was Secretary of State when I was in high school, registering to vote in my high school cafeteria, almost 18, obviously 18, but it came and gave the forms, and he was Secretary of State. And a Democrat. And I still checked Republican on my box. And I still respected Joe Manchin in that moment. And I went on to meet him multiple times and have always liked Joe Manchin as a person until more recently. Not the biggest fan of him these days, but I can still respect him because I feel like that's where I came from. This sense that you could just be you and presenting as whoever you were, complicated or not, full of questions and full of mystery, was just who we are as people.
I had no idea about that, but I just looked it up. Jains are vegetarians.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I am even more interesting that your parents gave you kind of the choice. That's really pretty open-minded. But let me just pin down on one or two things that offended me long before Trump, just to see how they didn't deeply offend you or how they didn't affect you. You were there. You went to Washington, I think, around 2006. I don't come from a veterans family or anything like that, but watching the war, the invasion of Iraq, and just the Bush administration, we could talk about other things, but just that. Where were you on that war, and how come? I say this to everybody because I try to be consistent. How come you weren't, if you weren't, horrified by that war?
That's a fantastic question. And when people are like, you're just part of the neocons who want war all the time and who prop up the, U.S. military industrial complex, I'm like, no, actually, I'm not, because I supported Condi Rice and sure, Bush was there and I clicked, but I got to be honest, I've never felt that there's a candidate that's run that I have felt completely aligned with on the R side. And less so on the D side. I think I saw Bill Clinton, just to be very, very frank about it.
Sure.
And I saw a very disgusting human being. Because when you're a young girl and you realize this guy did something with a cigar and left a stain on this gal's dress, that was weird. That was gross to me. And she was an intern. And so I'm in my teens watching that, I'm coming up. And maybe that had something to do with the fact that guy had a D next to his name. And I just was so disgusted by him. To this day, if I had the opportunity to have a picture with Bill Clinton, I would never do it.
I fully agree and felt that way at the time and still feel that way. But I guess, if that was your, if you were offended by that as a young girl, as a grown woman, as anybody should be, as any man should be, why then were you not far more offended by the war in Iraq and George W. Bush and everybody involved with that war.
Yeah. I was equally so, but I think I was just more like, okay, take the good with the bad. I'm definitely past this. I don't want war. I was sick over the invasion, Russia's invasion into Ukraine last year. I was about to deliver my little one. And I did a few months after Russia invaded. And I just remember crying for days on end. Obviously, I was super hormonal, but no, I mean, I think even if I wasn't hormonal, watching these people just be, my gosh, there's no words for it, right?
But you didn't feel that. I mean, we did a very similar thing in Iraq.
We did a similar thing. But I think it took years for me to see that. And by the time I did, I had this career on the Hill. And the reason why I've never left is because I have always believed in my ability to create change, to push reform. And I thought if I leave the table and I no longer have a seat at it, then I can't push for the change I want to see. And I remember during McMullen's campaign, I would push these ideas that we don't have to let's cut military spending, actually. Because there are some younger conservatives that are so frustrated, Pete. And I, as a former operative since 2011 to now, I've had the great privilege of seeing Mid-Atlantic Republicans, Southern Republicans, Western Republicans, and particularly people under 40 like me. We hate gerrymandering. We hate Citizens United. We want to see it overturned in our lifetimes. And we hate these wars, these endless wars. And so I was supportive of Joe Biden's pullout. Yeah, it was disastrous, but anybody who pulled us out, I think, would have been disastrous. It would have been, I think it just all would have been bad. And yeah, I'm pissed at Bush about lying, about the weapons of mass destruction. So it is really hard to square up with the fact that I still put a R next to my name. But I think what I saw was I was in too deep, and that maybe I could be part of the change. There could be this change in the party where, people like Bill Kristol, though I respect Bill, I, sit on a board with him and enjoy being at the table with him to talk about what he believes in. We both are on the board of Renewed Democracy Initiative together, which is Gary Kasparov's group. But then I look at people like Bill and I'm like, you were part of all that.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. I specifically with him. I appreciate, what he's done anti-Trump. But I don't think, frankly, I've told the story many times. I once sat down at a table next to him at a restaurant and I left because I was afraid of what I would say to him. And I didn't think it would make any difference. I'm immature and unthoughtful at times. And it doesn't make, I'm that asshole that just tells somebody whatever I want. And it makes no difference to them. And it's unhelpful. So I just didn't want to. I didn't think I needed to do that at that restaurant. Yeah. And so we left. But that's really interesting. And I appreciate everything that you're saying and the nuance that you're saying it with. But let me fast forward then to Obama. So I covered for both CNN and SiriusXM, both of his campaigns, the elections, and obviously the policy fights that happened. And I guess my question about that is, what did you think of then the Tea Party? And then, more specifically, the thing that we covered and talked about the most, at least that I did, was with healthcare, health policy. And I just think that my framing on politics and labels is, I really don't really understand how anybody can be supportive of the health insurance racket that we have and that it's connected to employers. And that I just was so upset at that time because as a progressive who was for single payer, Obama wanted, could only support this market-based solution, and Republicans were calling it socialism. And it was just we're not even able to have. So what were your thoughts about the Tea Party movement and the health policy fight, or the Obama years then?
Well, let's start with the Tea Party, because I was working for that first member of Congress when they first emerged. And they were very normal people that were just coming to Capitol Hill. I remember I met this one really nice husband and wife from New Jersey, and they'd taken the day off to come down. And one guy was a CPA, and the wife had a pretty decent job in the community as well. And they were just super hey, we've come down here because we are super concerned about the way the country's going, about spending by Washington. And it seemed very normal at that time. Just their grievances were pretty, I felt, every day. And I, too, was concerned about federal spending. I'm like, when a government gets too big, then there's they open the door then to be really oppressive, right? And to get things wrong more often than not. And that was so aligned with my ideology that in those early days of those Tea Party folks, I was kind of actually in lockstep with them. I'm like, I hear you. And then you start to see the crazies emerge. And then you started to see the crazies get the bullhorns, and things just went off the rails really quickly. And the two members of Congress I worked for were pretty socially far right. So they were super connected to these Tea Party groups. And as time went on, and I was on the Hill and I'm like, man, something just didn't smell right with these people. They're like really too frustrated, right? Like it's gone beyond just a conversation about the economics, like spending and like, what are we keeping for future generations? And like, I want my kids to be able to realize this dream of owning a home. Like it went way beyond that. It turned into, I mean, there was racist stuff hurled at me often sometimes like, oh, you and your people. And I'm like, me and my people, you mean my people in West Virginia? So that was really hard for me to see. But again, like I try to keep this very like front of mind, idea that there are bad actors everywhere. There are bad actors in every movement. There are, fringe actors that are going to try to hijack any movement for their own gain. And that's what I started to see. And when I saw Sarah Palin come on the scene, I was so disappointed in John McCain. I'm like, why'd you have to pick somebody like her, man? She's like setting us back in time. She makes us look like a character, a sort of conservative, right of center women even. Because I wasn't really deeply conservative. I never run out and be like, hey, I'm a conservative. But the Tea Party was hard to watch because I was with them until I wasn't with them, right? And so there was that. And again, here I was thinking, well, I can be a change. I can be a change. Because I've always kind of believed that, it's that Gandhi quote is you can be the change you wish to see in the world. So I'm super idealistic. People probably hear that throughout this entire conversation we're having is that I have always believed that one person is enough. Because I think I watched my dad do such superhero type stuff, like knowing that he could overcome such great obstacles to become not just this surgeon from tiny West Virginia, but he could go on to lead the American College of Surgeons and like give us this beautiful life all with his own two hands. And yes, with the help of the government, select things that the government could do right. So I wasn't always like government hater, but I'm just like, let's limit its power at certain levels. So I was big on like, let's throw things back to the states, the communities, and make sure that like government is hyper local and helping people that way.
What kind of surgeon was your dad?
General. At that time, he did everything like breast reconstruction for breast cancer survivors. He chose to focus on colorectal and breast cancer in the later years of his life, but he started doing everything. And I thought it was really cool to hear his stories. Yeah.
I'd love to talk more about your relationship with your dad because I want to write a book about raising daughters based on the women's relationships with their dads.
Amazing.
But
his relationship with me is literally, my mother was a big part of it. I really believe she was a backbone because she helped him do so much of what he was doing by giving up her job as a lawyer. And so, it took two to make our household work. Like it wasn't just dad, but his relationship with me, he really helped me form this ideology that everything doesn't have to be so hard and so fast. We can take our time and there's nuance.
What about the health policy fight? Were you involved in that? Or did you? That
was a hard one because dad came up in the era of private practice and he was still in private practice at that time that the Affordable Care Act passed. But he was also part of, in the 90s, a bunch of white coat days at the West Virginia State Capitol, which he helped organize, that were all about tort reform in West Virginia. So basically, he was losing all these talented surgeons that he would recruit from everywhere to build these clinics in rural areas and make sure somebody didn't have to travel 5 hours just to get a laparoscopy. Like what could be considered a very routine surgical procedure. He was getting surgeons to come to West Virginia and doing these satellite clinics, or they were doing outpatient procedures. And what essentially the malpractice, the litigious environment in West Virginia had created was this exodus of doctors. So dad helped work against that. And the Affordable Care Act, when I was a part of a Republican office as that was passing, that was super hard for me. Because I really believe in people being able to get care. That access to care is so important. But I also knew that single payer, in my heart of hearts, was not going to be the solution. If I really have to say, at the end of the day, I thought it would take away some of the competition and innovation that kept my dad in private practice and helped him create those satellite surgical clinics. At the height of his career, he had 8 clinics. Throughout Southern West Virginia. I mean, we're not a huge state. So it doesn't take, knowing the environment to know that how was this guy able to create these clinics? And it's because there was an incentive for him to do that. And did he get wildly rich? My dad didn't, but I'll tell you, a lot of his colleagues did by playing with the rules. They played fast and loose. And I'm not just saying it because he was my dad, but he really believed in doing the right thing. I think a little too much sometimes. Well, there's no such thing, he'd say. But I think at the end of the day, I knew single payer wasn't it. But what I loved is there were a couple things that were great about the Affordable Care Act. I felt people needed to be able to afford insurance. So that was big, the affordability part, to be able to go into the marketplace and just get a plan, although these plans were still wildly expensive. But one of the best, most incredible things the Affordable Care Act did was make it possible to cross state lines. I thought that was just silly. The fact that you couldn't port insurance. But there's still a great frustration. How do we make this system better?
It's so bad for so many people. And it's interesting having covered it for so long and so intensely as I did, and understanding it at a somewhat granular level, and just hearing so many anecdotes and experiences from people. It's just sad because we're still struggling in so many ways. I think it was my friend Christian Finnegan on the podcast last week that said connecting healthcare to employment is one of America's healthcare original sins. And it's like, the whole state lines thing, sure. But the same thing being like, if you lose your job, the way I did at Sirius XM, and like a dog, they threw me out like a dog. No, that was fine. It was fine. But the point is, I then had to go out on and you can't do your own thing. It's the most, in my mind, conservative argument for government provided health insurance is that if you want to be an entrepreneur, well, you can't be, because even if you saved up $100,000 in seed money, you can't leave your job because you have 2 kids that need your insurance and a husband or something. It's just such a racket, and we don't talk about it nearly enough. But it's good to get your perspective on that and understand why you thought the way that you did. Let me ask you one more kind of just general question about politics. I think me as a progressive or a Democrat or a liberal, a lot of it is instructed in that I might agree with a lot of your criticisms or others of government, local, state, or federal. I still trust government way more than I do the private sector for the most obvious reasons in the world. The private sector's job is to make money. And that's it. And the idea that we're going to just not have them, do it however they want without any guardrails, regulations, and laws is the antithetical to my moral beliefs. So I'm so much more pro-government at every level with all of its awfulness than I am the private sector and small or large corporations. What are your feelings on kind of government versus the private sector in terms of who you trust more with your child's life?
Yeah, Pete, you bring up so many really, really good points. And I mean, on the health policy front, when you talk about that employer connection to healthcare, it's nonsensical to me too. And so there's so much we probably agree on when we just really distill it all down to the facts here. And the fact is, if you lose your job and you try to go get COBRA, that is just expensive. I mean, that's the kind of thing. I've had friends lose jobs that they're like, I can't afford COBRA. So we're still sitting in this moment where whether you look at health policy or you're looking at immigration, things still feel really broken. Absolutely broken. So I guess to bring it round to your question of when we're talking about the private versus public sector, I'm big on public and private partnerships, huge on that, like any moderate would be these days. But I also know those aren't perfect and those aren't the end all be all solutions to everything. But I would say this, I'm not for complete deregulation, particularly not when it comes to environment. I'm a pro-conservation Republican. I would even say I'm like a Teddy Roosevelt type, of course. Because I grew up in West Virginia. I've seen what mountaintop removal and mining does. It's just the health of people in some of these communities, which I grew up just a few miles away from. These people are dead. Let me just put it very bluntly. I never talk like that, but it's like a knife in my stomach every time somebody just died because of an environmental factor. I'm talking about toxins in the stream behind their house. And these are people that I actually knew were my dad's patients. And for anybody confused, how can you talk about your dad's patients? I grew up in the 80s and 90s where my dad was not making house calls. But when you grow up in rural, small town America, everything is intermeshed. Like my dad's patients were like some of our friends. We used to get our produce from some of them, like weekly, multiple boxes. They just come drop on our doorstep. And what a privilege that was to be able to grow up like that, feeling so woven to my community. So I think definitely when we talk about deregulation, environmental and energy issues and how some of these modern day federal Republicans are handling them, like I'm at a complete odds. And I'm trying to do more work with smaller groups like American Conservation Council, the ACC, which is headed up by Benji Backer, a young, great young conservative who I've had the privilege of getting to know. And we're Gen Z and millennial types who are just like, no. We cannot trust corporations to do the right thing. You're killing our community members. And so there's that on energy and environment. But I will say,
what about the financial industry that destroyed the world economy because of their deregulation? Do you not agree with that? I don't know.
When I was working for that first congressman, that is probably before the Bush and the war stuff really seeped in, and I felt some kind of way about it. Like, what I really was like, ew, like I cannot say I love George W. Bush because, anyways, that's a whole different can of worms. But when we talk about, man, that financial crisis and having to save these big banks, I was part of this really small group of younger Republicans on the Hill that was like, let them fail. What are you doing? Bailing them out. These are behemoths. They're giants. They're juggernauts. Whatever word you want to use. Why are we saving these big banks? Nobody. That whole too big to fail mantra. Like it just.
I agree with you, but the point is the reason for the collapse was that they got to play fast and loose because Republicans and conservatives with the Democratic president, it was Clinton who signed the major deregulations. Yeah. They deregulated the banks, and the banks did exactly what they thought they would do, and they destroyed the world. And they're going to continue to do it if they're not regulated. Do you disagree with that being the main primary cause, the deregulation of those banks?
Yeah, I do think that was the impetus, of course. Okay. I mean, I would have to be silly to say it wasn't. But what do? I mean, how do we elect more perfect people, right? We get people who are younger into office who talk about...
we had Dodd-Frank. They put up Dodd-Frank and then they gutted that. I mean, they couldn't even get that. I mean, well, for the sake of time, because I'm stuck here with a billion other questions that I want to get to you. And I was like, you know what? Maybe we should just do something regular to try to understand,
I would love that.
And try to have a meeting of minds here, because I'm sure listeners have a whole bunch of questions for you. And maybe you can join one of our hangouts and take listeners' questions because, I'm really enjoying this, obviously. And I've always enjoyed our conversations, but never more like this, because we're having this one-on-one. We're learning so much about what's behind your thinking and motivation on things and moral beliefs on things. So let me just, to wrap it up here today, and we'll pick up in part 2 whenever you want. Like, what happens in 2016 with you and Trump? And I mean, at one point you were like threatened delegates. Trump, like, tell me about the breakup.
Okay, the breakup was massive. It was public. It was gross, and it blew up my career. So basically, it's inside baseball, and I would like to think like a normal person. I ran from the spotlight instead of running towards it. Back in 2016, I was just a regular old political consultant. I was really involved in my local Republican Party's politics, and I was on the executive committee, and I was doing what I feel like any good young foot soldier in politics does. And again, as you all have heard now, like I really believed in my ability to enact change, to create that change. And just to kind of put a bow tie on everything we've talked about, I've never believed in complete deregulation, but I also am really scared of a lot of regulation, right? Brought on by Big Brother. And I'll say what really kind of felt to me was by 2016, I knew who I was fully. And I was not afraid of telling people who I was. I was like, look, fiscally, I'm pretty conservative. But socially, I'm somewhat liberal. And it's because I was the head of a Greek system at a massive state school. Like, no surprise I went into politics because I was a president of Panhellenic Council at West Virginia University when I was my senior year. Yeah. So the friends who were like, how were you never not going to go into politics? But I learned a lot. And I survived an impeachment attempt, by the way. I had to sneak that in there.
For another day, I want to know.
Another day.
I want to know why they came after you as president of the what? The Greek?
Yeah, the head of all the sororities, the Pan-Hellenic Council.
Oh my God, we have to do a whole hour on that experience, because I also am very bigoted against, Greek life, and I've been disabused of it by many people who have been, part of fraternities or sororities, black and white, but I still have so we have to go deep into that at some point.
Let's do that.
I'm very ignorant. It could be no more ignorant on anything than that.
Oh my gosh.
And music. All right, so go ahead. And what happened? So what happened?
Well, I think about those college years and why I kind of had this in my gut. Like, you're going to go through a lot of shaky stuff in life, Rina, and people are going to not like that you're a Republican because you're brown. At some point, the click was there for me that I'm, someone is not like the others, right? I mean, I worked on Capitol Hill, passing by panes of glass where I'm literally the shortest, brownest, only female in the pack, and so it definitely hit me. But I always felt like I could be somebody that spoke their own truth and still survive. And I'd done that for years on Capitol Hill and had done that as a consultant. And when I was coming up in the local party, I got a great chance to go to the 2012 convention in Tampa. And it was a great time.
I was there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we didn't know each other then. I was like a nobody in 2012. Like, I was a young sort of Republican operative.
That's when I peaked.
I love this for you.
Now I'm a zero. I'm in a shed.
No.
But that 2012, that was a big year for me. Go ahead, though. I'm sorry. I'm making jokes.
So, I went to the convention. I tried to get into all the parties, went to the parties, had a lot of fun, saw what it was like to be on the floor as a delegate. And I was like, okay, next go round, I'm going to run to be a delegate on the floor and try to be, have some fun with this whole thing. And so, I'll just say, by that point, by 2016, because I got to sneak this in here, I was already somebody that was like, we need term limits. We need to end gerrymandering. And by the way, we need to overturn Citizens United, which I feel like is directly connected to a lot of, again, these problems you mentioned with Republicans and financial industry.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. Good. Yeah, go ahead.
I got to be honest about it. And I'll tell you why, Pete. This is important
because you saw fucking Republicans dialing for dollars. That's why you saw it happening. You saw it happening. But now you answer, and I won't answer for you.
But the thing was, I've been going to CPAC for years, and there were people at CPAC in the early years in the exhibit hall, U.S. Term Limits Convention. There were people saying the same stuff I said. So I just want to make sure, like, the audience hears that. Like, it's not like I'm like this unicorn.
No, I was there too. I was at CPAC several times, and there were like conservatives against the death penalty, and there were conservatives for it, because there's really good kind of from conservative definition points to be for or against things that often progressives and Democrats are. But go ahead. Right. So now here we are, 2006.
So I wanted to get elected as a delegate so I can be part of the party platform committee, and therefore I can be part of the national platform committee by being a delegate to the convention. Mm-hmm. You see how I'm like trying to I've always wanted to weave a story in my life because I read all those novels when I was 7 in my backyard on a blanket. Because I'm like, I got to be able to tell the story of why Rina, who I am today, has managed to exist in these worlds that don't seem to have places for her, right? So that was still in my mind as I wove my story. I didn't know what I was going to do, that I was going to blow up my career literally by being the first ever delegate in 2016, in the spring of 2016, that March. I went on Fox News. I have a very young commentary career. It's like I've been doing TV for about a decade, but professionally for about 5-6 years now.
Okay.
And this was the early days. So this was 7 years ago. And, longer than that. Okay. So longer career than I'm saying, but here I am. I'm trying to tell you, I go on Fox News. I'm asked about a quote I had been given in some tiny outlet about potentially supporting Hillary Clinton in the general election. So after the conventions are done, and they're like, but you're a delegate from DC. I'm like, yeah, to the convention. And by my bylaws, I can vote for anybody on a second ballot. So I was bound to Rubio on the first ballot as a delegate at the convention. So again, a very small opportunity in the summer. I was elected to it. There were 160 people running. So I ran in February on our state convention ballot, and I won out. I was the number 2 vote getter out of 160 people who ran for 16 delegate spots. Pretty proud of that. First time I've ever run as myself. And I carried this big sign that said, I'm the daughter of immigrants. I'm a small business owner because I had my LLC. I was very, very invested. It was literally running for student body president. I was like, I've done this song and dance before, right? So I get the votes. I go And then they're like, hey, we've got a black guy who is our number one vote getter, and we got a brown woman as our number two vote getter to be a delegate to the convention. So this is what the local party officials are like so happily touting. They want us to do media interviews. I'm like, sure, I'll go on Fox News. I go on Fox News and I tell them, if Trump is my party's nominee, I'm going to have to potentially vote for Hillary in the general. I turned on my phone. The right wing had come after me. Breitbart News came after me. The Washington Post said I was emblematic. I was the poster girl of the Never Trump movement. And so I had to fight. My party decided to cross my name off the list, didn't submit it to the national convention, basically acted like I wasn't elected because they just didn't like what I'd said about Trump, because he was the presumptive nominee at that point. So they all wanted to get in line for administration jobs, and they couldn't have me out here saying inconvenient things. I'm like, but we're Rubio delegates. And next thing I know, I had to mount a legal case to get myself reinstated. And there was a tribunal of 7 RNC people, men and women from around the country, who put out this decision, who said, the fact that you have crossed off this democratically elected delegate's name is problematic, because they tried to say I couldn't own multiple homes and that I was resident of another state. And I'm like, Mitt Romney does it. Donald Trump does it. You don't ask them where
they
they're
tried to find something to get a rule to get you kicked off that wasn't because of what you had said and voted. Okay. Yeah. Well, it worked.
Well, they did it because I was politically inconvenient, right?
Right.
So they tried to
well,
say
that's politics. They find something and they hang it. Oh, sorry. All right. See you later. You're not pulling the. Wow. Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
So,
but the best part is that I got reinstated, Pete.
Oh,
and I beat back Paul Manafort, because it was Paul Manafort and those guys who were behind the effort to get rid of me and others like me.
So much for the brown daughter of an immigrant who owns an LLC. I mean, once you're not pulling for their guy, bye-bye. My God. All right, listen, you have to go. You told me already. I have to go. And so that's why I'm ending it abruptly, but not really, because we talked for almost an hour. And we'll pick up there and we'll talk about more specific issues and everything else. And we'll have you meet everybody. And I really appreciate you joining me. This was really interesting and fun. And I hope people like it and reach out to you. Thank you so much, Rina. Let's do it again soon.
You're the best. Thank you.
All right, there she goes, huh? Rina Shah. What did you think? Did we get to the bottom of it? Did we figure it all out? Should we keep that conversation going? And who else should I be talking to? Let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. That's all I've got for you on a Memorial Day Monday. I hope you liked it. Hope you appreciate it. Go say hi to Rina on Twitter. Go follow her. Let her know you heard her here on the show. And I will be right back here tomorrow for yet another. Thank you so much for listening today. Go sign up for a subscription. Give the show a review. Sign up on YouTube. Go subscribe to YouTube for free. YouTube.com/standupwithpete. And John Carroll will be singing us out. Oh, I almost forgot your quote of the day. What should we do today? How about another anti-war quote on Memorial Day? I think that's more than appropriate. Here is Gandhi. Observe good faith and justice toward all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. I appeal for cessation of hostilities, not because you are too exhausted to fight, but because war is bad, in essence. We will not learn how to live together in peace by killing each other's children. Oh, wow. Very provocative anti-war quote from Gandhi. But that's what I've got for you. John Carroll, take us away. We'll talk to you tomorrow, guys.
You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination. reaching for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run